This is Jim, and this is your cage as we put it together. And I wanted to start this video to show you a couple things about your cage, but following this we're going to have more of a step-by-step procedure of how we put it together and a few things that I wanted to make note of. But while it's together, I want you to see that you've got a left side panel and you've got a right side panel, and I'm going to label them that way because they have to accommodate those 5-foot shelves toward the back of the cage. So if you notice over on that right side panel, there's two holes at shelf level, and that's where that 5-foot shelf is going to go into. But on this side, if and when you use the 5-foot shelf, the holes would have to be on the back side of that side panel too. So they're not identical, they're not interchangeable side panels. So you have a left side panel, and the other one that you don't see here is going to be a right side panel, and then you have another right side panel. So in your package you'll have two right side panels with the holes for that 5-foot shelf where they should be, and you'll have one left side panel that goes on this leftmost cage. And just in case it's not obvious, but that vertical divider is attached to the right side of this cage. So when you separate these two cages, that vertical divider goes with the right half of the cage, and that extra side panel goes with the left side of the cage. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. The other, just as we talked about, it didn't happen quite like I thought, but you notice that you have plastic, about 1/8 of an inch of plastic down and up this piece that stops about there. And this was the gap I was telling you about that there's no way to get rid of because it's just going to be there. But because there's no plastic up at the top, then I was able to close it a little bit tighter here. I did come into a little different problem, and that's with this piece of plastic back here that kept this side panel away from the back panel by 1/8 of an inch. It sort of offset everything. So I've drilled these holes on the side panel bigger than they normally are, and that gives a little wiggle room for these bolts to fit in. If you have any problems, Crystal always suggests that our customers put the bolts in loosely first. Just put them in so that they get going 1 or 2 or 3 turns to get the whole thing at least attached, and then go back with your Allen wrench and screw them in the rest of the way. I think that's going to be particularly important on your cage just because the math isn't quite what it should be. The math is offset by a couple pieces of plastic in odd places. So with that, we're going to go back and add to the video now of step-by-steps of things of how to put it together. Okay, first thing we're going to do when putting your cage together is take the left side panel and the left back panel and make a little L shape. I'm giving you a little video to show you this because I want you to be able to see that we did not put any pine tree clips up and down on the side panel on the edge, because that edge is right here where the back is going to be attached to it. So what we'll show you in just a minute is how it looks when it's put together, but that the plastic is going to be held on. Even though we've got some horizontal pine tree clips up and down, it's going to be pretty much held on by the bolts to get bolted in. So we're going to bolt it together now. Okay, now that we've got the front, back, side, and top of the left side of the cage, I wanted to show you what we talked about just a minute ago. We did not put pine tree clips on the side panel on those vertical sides because they would have been pushing up against the edge of the front and the back panels. But what we talked about was those bolts will actually hold that plastic in place. So even though there's nothing holding the plastic on vertically here and here, the bolts are holding it tight, sandwiched against the front and back and the top panel. Now, while we're here, and I'll show you that we opted to go ahead and put horizontal pine tree clips on the back panel, partly because I understood you're probably not going to use the floor very often, and in that case, I think you probably need those pine tree clips to hold this big piece of plastic from vibrating back and forth. We did put the verticals on the back panel because they don't interfere with anything. It was only the verticals on the side panel that actually interfered with anything. Those horizontal pine tree clips are underneath the top panel, but it's up out of the way where you probably won't have any problem. And again, as I said, the middle we opted because you probably won't be using the floor that often. And we did put them at the bottom because that's just a frame around there and it shouldn't harm anything either. If any of that is a problem, all we can suggest is maybe a little caulking might help. Or you could always take out these pine tree clips too. There's an easy way to do that. All right, now that we've got the left side of the cage completely done, we're going to start attaching the back of the right side and the front of the right side to make a bigger U shape. So we're going to attach it just like normal right there. And when we put in this vertical divider, it's going to be very important that the plastic side face to your left. It has to be that way because it's the exact same distance from that side of the plastic for that 5-foot shelf as it is from this side of the plastic to the side panel. So plastic has to be pointed to the left. So we're going to walk it in there, and you notice you may not put the floor in, but if you ever do, that floor has 2 threads there, and it's going to bolt onto this middle bar that we put in here. I think Crystal's already talked to you. If you ever put that floor on the right side of the cage, you would take out that middle bar. It's bolted to the top vertical divider and it's bolted underneath to the bottom vertical divider, so it's got 4 bolts that are holding it in. But if that floor were on the right side of the cage, that bar needs to go out of the way. That's kind of the fun design of your cage. But for now, the vertical divider is all one piece. It's going to go in there, and through those holes we're going to attach the floor and rest the top on top of this a little bit later. And then it bolts to the front and back of the cage through the threads that are there. And then what we normally do is put bolts through the holes around the edges of the cage and then rest the top on it. And then what you can do is while it's resting there, unless you have somebody helping you, then you can go back and insert the bolts and tighten them. Right now, the right side top is going to be easier because it's going to rest right on top of that vertical divider. We got 4 extra wide shelves. The best way to put these shelves in is going to be to angle it down and up toward the back. Put those hooks in those holes right there, and just with a little pressure, going to put them into place. And then since you've got wire on the front, you'll just be lifting the shelf and maybe pull the wire away just a little bit. You've got our shelves already, so probably won't be anything new to you. Okay, so the last thing here is going to be the shelf, and to put the shelf in, you notice it's going to be a little tricky because you've got 2 holes here and 2 holes behind me, and the best way to do this will be to angle this so that those 2 hooks go right in those holes. But now the tricky part is going to be to raise this and get it in those other 2 holes. So what I've done on this shelf is to flare out those hooks a little bit so that they'll be a little easier. Instead of pointing straight down, you might have to give them a little nudge to get them on there. But the hooks are on one end are pointed out a little bit. The hooks on the other end are pointed straight down like normal. They'll hook on just fine. So then that shelf will be on both ends.